There are professions where you simply show up for work. You drive a car, crunch numbers, sign papers, have lunch, and go home. And then there are actors. People who, in order to portray someone else's life, are willing to temporarily stop living their own. For normal people, preparing for work means coffee and an anxious rush at 9 in the morning. For an actor, it means a month without food, a foreign accent, a shattered psyche, and the conviction that it's all for the sake of art. Although more often than not, it's simply because they can't do anything else. Actors are a strange category of beings who seriously believe that to play a madman, you have to become a madman. That the pain must be real, the fear must be real, and the tears must come from the nervous system, not from a bottle of glycerin. They seem to fear that the audience will sense the falseness if they suffer for show. So they do everything for real, sometimes too real. These are the very people who lose themselves in a film, only to spend years trying to find themselves again. And the strangest thing is that they like it. They call it the process, as if the process is not how you sit in a trailer talking to an imaginary friend, because that's what your character would do. Somewhere between rehearsal and reality, the actor ceases to be himself. And while in everyday life this sounds alarming, in cinema it's called brilliant work. The whole world admires it, critics applaud it, and the studio hands out awards. And the person who lived alone for 3 months and ate 1 apple a day just smiles quietly because now his suffering is on the release schedule. Sometimes it may seem that acting is not a craft, but a voluntary form of self-destruction, only legalized. But that's exactly what makes it so appealing. People don't go to the movies for perfect makeup or good lighting. They go to see someone experience pain, fear, or happiness as if it were real. And somewhere deep down, they understand that maybe it really isn't all an act. After all, an actor is a person who becomes someone else every day so that the viewer can feel who they are for at least a couple of hours. Today, we remember those who literally became someone else in order to play a role. Those who proved that for the sake of art, you can lose everything, except perhaps your sense of reality. There is one film that made the phrase, "preparing for a role," sound like a diagnosis. In short, The Machinist is a film about a man who doesn't sleep. Not figuratively, but literally. A year without sleep. The protagonist, Trevor Resnick, lives like a shadow. He works in a factory, loses weight, loses his mind, and gradually dissolves into his own hallucinations. Everything is shot in cold, gray-blue tones, as if the image itself suffers from insomnia. And this is perfect for an actor who decided to become a ghost in all seriousness. Now about Christian Bale. Christian Bale is a man who treats roles the way surgeons treat the operating table, with fear, excitement, and the certainty that someone may not survive. And in 2003, that someone was himself. For the role of Trevor Resnick, Bale lost almost 30 kilograms, dropping to 55 kilograms at a height of 183 centimeters. It was physically uncomfortable to look at him, and that was exactly what he wanted to achieve. In fact, the actor wanted to try even harder and lose weight to 99 pounds, 45 kilograms, to surprise everyone even more and show everyone his talent for transformation. But the filmmakers intervened and forbade Bale from shedding his skin. His diet consisted of 1 apple and a can of tuna a day. Sometimes he had a cup of black coffee to stave off dizziness. He stayed on this diet for 4 months. Doctors later said that with such a diet, he could easily go down in history, but more likely end up in intensive care. Bale reached a state where his bones were literally sticking out through his skin. At auditions, he looked like a sketch for a horror movie, which only fueled interest. The script for The Machinist sat on the shelf for a long time. Studios refused it. Too dark, too depressing, too Spanish production team, where no one understood why it should be filmed at all. But director Brad Anderson knew that a story about a man losing himself couldn't look healthy. And when Bale appeared on set, thin, transparent, with eyes as if he no longer had a pulse, he knew the film had worked even before the camera started rolling. Filming took place in Barcelona, although the plot was set in America, in the state of California. Spain was cheaper and the atmosphere was right. Dust, heat, and the feeling that the whole world was watching you through a dirty window. Bale didn't talk much to his colleagues. He was constantly in character. So much so that some actors admitted that it was scary on set. Anderson later said that the crew often stopped simply because they were afraid Bale would fall. The actor was dizzy, he stumbled on flat ground, and once the cameraman said, "If he collapses now, at least I'll get that on film." It was dark humor, but there was no other way to deal with it. The funny thing is that immediately after The Machinist, Bale was offered Batman Begins, And in 6 months, he had to regain not just weight, but his whole self. He gained more than 45 kilograms, half of which turned into muscle, and the other half into a legend about how one actor managed to live 2 opposite lives in 1 year. They say that the studio doctors later asked him not to do that again. He nodded, and then he did the same thing 3 more times for The Fighter, Vice, and American Hustle. So if there is one person in Hollywood who is capable of playing not only a role but also pain itself, it is him. If The Machinist showed how an actor can disappear for the sake of a role, Bronson is a story about how an actor, on the contrary, blew up the space with his presence. Nicholas Winding Refn's film is a biographical portrait of Charles Bronson, Britain's most dangerous prisoner, who spent more than 30 years behind bars, most of them in solitary confinement. In essence, this is not a prison drama, but a circus performance inside a mental hospital, where the main clown is simultaneously a beast, a philosopher, and an artist who fights with the guards to the sound of opera music. Tom Hardy approached the role with the same ferocity with which his character approached fights. In 6 weeks, he gained more than 20 kilograms, transforming himself from a skinny London actor into a beefy, rage-filled bull. His training was not conventional. Instead of diets and programs, he did sit-ups, push-ups, and ate a ton of peanut butter. Director Refn told him, he mustn't just be dangerous, he must fill the frame. Hardy filled it to the brim. Bronson himself, a real person who is still in prison, was initially against it. He didn't like the idea of someone playing him wrong. Then Hardy came to see him in person. They talked on the phone, then face-to-face through glass. And, as Tom himself later recounted, a week later, he gave me his mustache. Literally. Bronson shaved it off and gave it to the actor as a blessing. After that, the trust was complete. Hardy promised to show the real beast. Filming took place in closed rooms where the actor spent 12 hours a day, practically naked, covered in paint and sweat. The violent scenes were shot with almost no retakes. At one point, studio security asked the film crew not to enter the set during the prison scenes. Hardy wasn't just acting, he was losing control. He fought, screamed, and threw props around. According to Refn, in those moments he wasn't Tom Hardy. He was the guy that people write laws about. Although there were no conflicts between the actor and the director, the atmosphere was tense. Refn forced Hardy to keep his body in constant tension, with almost no rest. Hardy replied that it wouldn't work otherwise. After filming, the actor admitted that it was harder to get out of character than to get into it. When you play a man with no breaks for months, he said, you start to forget why you need them. Dallas Buyers Club is a film about a cowboy who doesn't know how to lose. The doctors told him, you have AIDS, you'll be dead in a month. He said, well, that's a shame. And he went looking for drugs that were officially banned. He brought pills from Mexico, sold them to other patients, and set up an underground club where people had at least a chance to live a little longer. It's a simple story, a stubborn man against the system. And against the backdrop of this circus appears Rayan, a transgender woman who had enough self-irony to joke even at her own funeral. She was played by Jared Leto, the same guy who can turn any lost a little weight for the role into I almost died. He approached filming like a marathon on an empty stomach. He just stopped eating. Sometimes an apple, sometimes coffee, sometimes nothing. He said he didn't count calories, he just stopped counting food altogether. After a couple of weeks, he began to resemble a skeleton in a shiny dress. He literally had no cheeks, just skin and eyes. Everyone on set walked around with food, and he sat with a cup of tea and said that the smell was making him nauseous. Once, they say, someone brought him a burger. He took it, sniffed it, and gave it back. It looks good, but I'm not ready. He mainly ate liquids, a little broth, a little water with lemon. When his body started to malfunction, he just kept going. In an interview later, he admitted that sometimes he would get up and not remember why. Like, he would go to the set, and his head would lag 5 seconds behind. His body was working, his brain was catching up. He filmed in this state, quietly with a slight tremor, as if every word came with effort. On set, he didn't say he was starving, he just kept quiet. No one saw him eat. The makeup artist noticed that the skin on his face was starting to crack, but he dismissed it. It's okay, it's holding up, Leto said. McConaughey later said that he saw him eat a piece of apple and look like it was Christmas dinner. Director Jean-Marc Vallée did not intervene. He understood that if anyone offered Leto a snack now, he would simply walk away. It all looked less like an actor's sacrifice and more like a habit, as if Leto simply did not know any other way to work. He wasn't acting. He was existing somewhere on the verge of fainting, but it fit the character perfectly. Rayon also lives on the last of his strength, smiling, putting on makeup, pretending that everything is under control, even though his body is already giving up. Leto seemed to be literally copying this state. After filming, he said that the first thing he did was order pizza and ice cream. He ate and couldn't taste anything. His body simply didn't understand what was happening. Then he started to regain weight, but admitted that he never fully returned to normal. He had lived in a state of on the verge for too long. Dallas Buyers Club became not a film for him, but something like a field experiment on himself. Without directorial mythology, without interviews about the method, just a man who decided to see how much he could endure. And he endured. Although, to be honest, it's unclear why. The Whale is the story of Charlie, an English teacher who weighs over 200 kilograms and hardly ever leaves his house. He teaches online, constantly apologizes to the camera, and all he has left is an attempt to repair his relationship with his daughter. The entire film consists of one person in one room, but that's enough to feel how hard it is for him to breathe. And this hard-to-breathe feeling isn't just in the film. Brendan Fraser, who played Charlie, went through the same thing. Fraser had long since disappeared from the big screen, and this role was a chance for him to prove once again that he wasn't just that guy from The Mummy, and he clung to it with a death grip. The problem is that this isn't the kind of role where you can stand beautifully in the spotlight. Here, you literally have to fall apart before your eyes. The costume weighed almost 130 kilograms. It took 3 to 4 hours to put on, layer by layer, latex, foam rubber, cooling packs, because you could boil inside. He spent 6 to 8 hours a day in this thing. He said that the first thing he realized was, I even breathe differently. In the suit, every movement required effort. Sitting down, standing up, just turning around. Once he tried to walk to the kitchen, and said that he felt as if he had run a marathon. Sometimes filming had to be stopped because he needed to catch his breath. It didn't look heroic, it was just work that took a toll on the body. Fraser prepared in advance. He didn't gain any real weight, but he still changed his diet to adapt to the regime. Breakfast consisted of oatmeal, light protein, and nothing fatty so as not to overload his body. Coffee was without sugar. He said he drank a lot of water because he was constantly sweating under the suit, and at some point he lost track of how much fluid he was losing. Sometimes he would take off the suit, and water would literally pour out of it. The cameraman joked that you could wring it out like a towel. There was another factor, psychological. He said that after the first few days of filming, he began to understand what it was like when people looked at you not as a person, but as a mass. The suit was so realistic that some of the crew didn't recognize him at first. He would sit in a chair, and people would walk by thinking he was some kind of stunt double. And this feeling of disappearing really shook him. The team constantly discussed where the line between acting transformation and exploitation lies. Fraser's simple answer was, I want the audience to see the person, not the costume. And it seems he succeeded. After filming, he admitted that it took him a long time to recover. His back hurt, his knees cracked, and sometimes he woke up at night in a cold sweat, as if his brain remembered that he was back in that costume. He said that the first thing he did when it was all over was go home, lie down on the floor, and just breathe. Not because he was tired, but because he could finally do it. Monster is the story of Aileen Wuornos, a woman who got tired of being pushed around and decided to fight back. A highway prostitute, she lived in motels, slept under bridges, and then became the first female serial killer in the United States, who also bragged about it, saying she had no regrets. But the film is not about murder, it's about how a person loses their mind and then can't pull themselves together. As soon as they said that Charlize Theron would be playing the role, everyone was like, come on. She was the beauty from the perfume commercials in Hollywood. They told her straight up, you're too fashionable, too beautiful, too Dior to play a woman who reeks of gasoline and cheap cigarettes from a mile away. But she didn't care and decided to prove them wrong, not with words but with actions. First of all, she stopped caring that she was Charlize. She quit working out and started eating everything in sight. Pasta, French fries, burgers, ice cream, anything to make her body blur. She gained 15 kilograms, but it wasn't about the numbers. It was about how she walked, how her face looked, how she carried herself. She later said on set that for the first time she felt how weight affects your mood, that your body starts to control you, not the other way around. The makeup artist added fuel to the fire. Yellow teeth, blotchy skin, greasy hair, a layer of dirt that couldn't be washed off. When the actress sat down in the makeup chair in the morning, she came out a different person by lunchtime. No eyebrows, a dull gaze, a smile lost somewhere between nicotine and despair. Director Patty Jenkins said at one point that she had completely stopped seeing her as an actress. It was Eileen walking around the set. The work was difficult. No one joked around on set. Everyone walked as quietly as possible, as if afraid of disturbing the atmosphere. Theron kept her distance from everyone, didn't talk between takes, and didn't look in the mirror. She sat alone and smoked. It seemed as if she was trying to understand where her role ended and she herself began. There were many stories circulating about the film, seemingly trivial, but revealing. For example, she deliberately did not use air conditioning so that her skin would be sticky and tired. Or, she once said that she couldn't look herself in the eye when she dressed up in the heroine's costume, as if she were lying to herself. Even her co-star, Christina Ricci, said that at some point she simply forgot what Charlize looked like in real life. The studio was afraid that the film would flop. Like, who needs an actress who mutilated herself? But that's exactly what hooked everyone. There was no heroism in the film, only dirt, sweat, fatigue, and rare glimpses of something human, which made it even more nauseating. Theron did not try to justify her, did not make her a victim. She simply showed a person who had no choice. After Monster, everyone understood that Charlize Theron was now different. No embellishments, no glamour, no unnecessary words. Just an actress who once decided to erase herself. And it seems she succeeded. Yes, Christian Bale, again. And yes, he's doing something to his body again. Last time, he almost disappeared for The Machinist, and now it's the opposite. For Vice, he transformed himself into Dick Cheney, the US Vice President, a man with a face like stone and a heart that was actually replaced 6 times. Bale has once again taken the familiar path, through pain, fat, and calories. The plot of the film can be described briefly. Vice is a political biography filmed as a black comedy. It is a story about how a quiet, inconspicuous official became the most influential person in the White House. While the president waved his arms in front of the cameras, Cheney sat on the sidelines and pulled the strings. Power without unnecessary noise. That's what this film is about. No explosions, no shootouts, just power, cynicism, and the ability to sit quietly while others talk. To play Cheney, Bale had to literally grow wider. He gained more than 20 kilograms. No silicone pads, no fat suits, just food and patience. They say he ate pies almost every day, fried meat, pasta, ice cream, and lots of butter. Basically anything he could get his hands on. Then, in an interview, he said that he learned how to get fat properly, as if it were a separate science. All this was not just for the sake of a weight. He had to change his gait, posture, and breathing. He consulted with a trainer, watched hundreds of videos of Cheney, and copied his manner of moving and speaking. Even his voice was different, rougher, lower, with a slight wheeze. Makeup took 4 hours a day. Bald spot, facial prosthetics, neck, chin, wrinkles. By the end of filming, the skin under the makeup was constantly inflamed. He sweated, couldn't breathe, but didn't complain. Director Adam McKay said that Bale approached the role with the precision of a surgeon. He brought printouts of Cheney's interviews, discussed how he held his glass, where he looked when he lied. Everyone on set understood that he wasn't playing for an Oscar. He was just interested in taking it to the extreme. McKay joked that Bale is like a special effect, only cheaper. After filming, doctors said that his heart was not thrilled with the experiment. Bale himself admitted that at some point he realized that enough was enough and there would be no more such transformations. But, of course, he then starred in Ford v Ferrari and lost weight again. So believing him is a dubious idea. On set, Bale remained calm, almost like his character. He watched silently, then delivered his lines, and everyone just froze. Steve Carell said that, "At some point I forgot who was next to me, the actor or Cheney himself." The makeup artists added that even between takes, he sat in his chair like Cheney, slightly hunched over, hands on his stomach, looking away. When the film was released, Bale won a Golden Globe and was nominated for an Oscar. In his speech, he thanked Satan for his inspiration. And this is probably the only time no one doubted that he was serious. After Vice, it became clear that Bale is a man who can become anyone. The only question is how many pounds, years, and nerves he is willing to spend on it. Suspiria is a story about a dance school where students are turned into witches. More precisely, the witches are already there, but the girls don't know it. Dancing, blood, psychotherapy, and a bit of German depression. That's pretty much how it works. But the strangest thing about this film is not the witches, but Tilda Swinton. She plays 3 characters at once: the strict choreographer, Madame Blanc, the old head witch, and the elderly psychoanalyst Joseph Klemperer. And while the first two roles seem logical, the old man is something only Tilda could have thought of. Director Luca Guadagnino initially wanted to cast a real elderly actor, but Swinton offered to do it herself. He thought she was joking, but Tilda wasn't. She simply decided, why not, and went to the makeup artists. They sighed because it meant months of work, but there was no way around it. The makeup transformed her into an 82-year-old man. Every day, she spent about 4 hours in the chair. Latex, silicone, glue, a wig, wrinkles, bags under the eyes, fake ears, eyebrows. They even changed the shape of her neck. Everything was done by hand. She insisted that the costume be as accurate as possible, even with small details like age spots and a slight stoop. And yes, she really did wear a prosthetic male genitalia. This is not a rumor or a myth. Tilda asked for it to be made so that she could feel the character's body differently. She explained it simply. If you play an old man, you have to feel the physical difference, even when the camera isn't rolling. No one on set knew that Klemperer was Swinton. The credits listed a fictional actor named Lutz Ebersdorf, with a fake biography that said he was a German theater artist. The team kept everything secret until the film was released. Even at press screenings, journalists argued about whether it was makeup or a real old man. Tilda remained silent. Only a few months later did she admit that it was her. Working in this makeup was difficult. It weighed several kilograms. The skin couldn't breathe, sweat collected under the layers of glue, and everything had to be filmed in an hour and a half. The contact lenses caused irritation, and there was always glue under her nose. But Swinton didn't complain. She just came in, sat down, and waited for them to transform her into a man. The makeup artists said she never asked for a break. The atmosphere on set was as strange as the film itself, a mixture of occultism, dancing, and German discipline. Guadagnino filmed everything seriously, without jokes, and Tilda fit in perfectly. First as a woman, then as a witch, then as an old man trying to figure out what was going on around him. When the film was released, viewers were sure that the old man was played by some unknown German actor. Then it turned out that it was Tilda, and everything fell into place. Because if there is a character in a film whose age, gender, and origin are unclear, you don't even need to look at the credits. It's still Tilda Swinton. The girl with the dragon tattoo has everything we love about David Fincher: coldness, order, pain, and an endless sense of unease, as if the camera knows just a little more than the viewer. The story is simple. Journalist Mikael Blomkvist arrives in Sweden to investigate the disappearance of a girl and finds an assistant that even the most daring writer could not have imagined. Lisbeth Salander is a hacker, a misanthrope, a creature without age or gender, with a mind sharper than any knife. Together, they unravel an old crime. And the further they go, the stronger the feeling that evil is somewhere nearby. Rooney Mara did not come to this role by accident. Fincher saw hundreds of actresses, from Scarlett Johansson to Natalie Portman, but they all looked too alive. He needed someone who the audience could see as a cold, reserved, and inscrutable character. Mara agreed to audition without knowing what it would be and received an offer that others might have turned down. For the role of Lisbeth, she didn't need to act. She needed to literally disappear. She bleached her eyebrows, shaved her head, pierced her nose, lip, and eyebrow, and then her nipple. Fincher insisted that everything had to be real, otherwise the audience would sense the falseness. She didn't object, only asking for a couple of hours to say goodbye to herself. When she returned, almost nothing remained of the former Rooney. Preparation for filming lasted several months. Mara studied hacker forums, read biographies of girls who had survived violence, and talked to psychologists and those who live outside of society. She said that Lisbeth is not a rebel, but a person who simply does not know how to be different. For her, loneliness is not a punishment, but a habit. And to show this, Rooney stopped talking to her friends, hardly left her apartment, and spent a week without a phone or the internet to truly feel isolated. The filming was very Fincher-esque. Lots of takes, absolute discipline, and no sentimentality. The most difficult scene was obviously the one involving violence. It took almost a week to shoot, and every day the actors left in tears. After the takes, Fincher remained silent, just nodding, while Rooney was unable to speak for several hours. She later said that it wasn't acting, but pure pain. But it was this scene, she said, that made Lisbeth come alive, not as a heroine, but as a person who had experienced something that couldn't be written into the script. She and Daniel Craig were not particularly close. They worked like two parallel lines, intersecting only where necessary. He was a cold rationalist, she was anarchy in leather and metal. Fincher monitored this balance like a chemical reaction. A little more heat and everything would explode. When filming ended, Mara couldn't shake the image for a long time. She continued to wear Lisbeth's clothes, kept her piercings, and at press conferences it seemed that it was not the actress speaking, but the same hacker who had simply found her way into the real world. She later admitted that this role changed her forever. It made her stronger, but also took away some of her peace of mind. Perhaps that is why her Lisbeth is not a character, but an admission that sometimes, in order to play the truth, you have to sacrifice a part of yourself. The film Black Swan tells the story of Nina, a ballerina who wants to be perfect. She must become two people at once, gentle and light like the white swan, and predatory and dark like the black swan. And in her attempts to combine these two images, she simply goes mad. It's all logical. Dancing 8 hours a day, sleeping 3, eating a lettuce leaf, anyone would start seeing feathers on their back. For Natalie Portman, this film was not just a job. It was, in essence, a physical experiment. How much can the human body endure for the sake of art? She trained for 6, then 8 hours a day. Ballet is not choreography. It's when your legs, back, knees, and everything else hurt at the same time. She was trained by professional ballerina Mary Helen Bowers, who immediately said, "If you want to look like a ballerina, you'll have to suffer a little." Natalie suffered conscientiously. She lost almost 10 kilograms to look fragile and airy. Some exercises made her dizzy, but Aronofsky just smiled. The director of the film, by the way, is a man who loves to watch actors' psyches collapse right in front of the camera. He calls it the method, when everyone else calls it something else. He deliberately created tension between Portman and Mila Kunis so that the jealousy that was in the script could be felt in real life. The two actresses quickly understood this and began to play along, portraying competition. As a result, there is friendship between them, but hatred on camera. So the method worked, although not quite as the director had intended. The filming took place in an environment that the actors themselves later described as hell. Everything was filmed on real sets, with cold temperatures, cramped spaces, and mirrors that created the feeling that someone was constantly watching. Portman suffered constant injuries, a dislocated shoulder, a damaged rib, and bloody blisters on her feet. But she kept going. She said that if ballerinas can endure it, so can she. When they said cut, she seemed happier than Nina herself in the finale. A separate drama unfolded after the film's release. Ballet understudy. Sarah Lane claimed that Portman did not dance all the scenes herself and that most of the difficult movements were hers. The studio immediately went into "we did it all ourselves" mode. Darren Aronofsky said that Natalie did 85% of the dancing, while the understudy claimed it was 5%. The truth is somewhere in between, but it didn't affect the Oscars. In the end, Portman received her well-deserved statuette, but along with it came chronic pain in her legs and a whole host of memories of how terrible beauty can be. After filming, she admitted that she felt like a person who had survived a disaster but made a movie about it. So yes, actors are willing to do a lot for the sake of art. But if someone asks why Natalie Portman exhausted herself so much for Black Swan, The Nutty Professor is the story of Professor Sherman Klump, a kind-hearted man who spends his entire life in the laboratory, weighs about half as much as a refrigerator, and dreams of one simple thing: to be normal. He invents a serum that transforms him into a slim, confident, handsome man named Buddy Love. But Buddy, as is often the case, has a personality slightly worse than that of a serial killer with a sense of humor. As a result, the professor struggles not with excess weight, but with his alter ego, and the entire film turns into a debate between kindness and vanity. The role was difficult not because he had to play a fat man, but because Eddie Murphy had to play 6 other people, all of whom were members of the same family. The Klump family is like a separate universe where everyone talks loudly, eats chicken, and laughs so hard that even the dishes start to vibrate. Almost all of them are Eddie himself. He insisted on playing everyone: mom, dad, brother, grandmother, and even that strange uncle who always makes jokes at the wrong time. Universal Studios initially thought the actor had lost his mind. Then they watched a test take where Murphy talked to himself in 5 different roles and decided that maybe he should continue to lose his mind. The makeup took 6 hours a day. Eddie would sit in a chair, and Rick Baker and his team would work their magic on him. The same masters who would later win an Oscar for this work. Layers of latex, a fake belly, chin, cheeks, rubber hands. And in the end, it wasn't the comedy star of the 80s who appeared in front of the camera, but a giant, cute professor who smiled shyly and was afraid to breathe too deeply so that the costume wouldn't burst. According to Murphy, inside this spacesuit, he sweated like he was on a treadmill, but looked like he was on the cover of a magazine for people who love mashed potatoes. The family dinner scenes, where 5 Eddie Murphys sit at the table, took weeks to shoot. He changed clothes, makeup, voice, and posture one by one and argued with himself. To achieve realism, the table was moved, angles were changed, and dozens of takes were reshot. According to Baker, by the end of the day, the actor could literally hate himself as an actor, partner, and relative. Physically, it was one of the most exhausting films of his career. But it was this film that showed that Murphy was not just a comedian with a loud laugh, but a man capable of disappearing behind a character. He didn't play a fat man, he lived as one, awkward, touching, intelligent, and even when the professor turned into the smug buddy love, for some reason the audience continued to love Clamp. For this role, Murphy received a Golden Globe nomination and a new reputation, not just as a star, but as a man who could be anyone, literally. And when journalists asked him what it was like to play an entire family, he simply replied, "Sometimes it's easier to be everyone than to be one person." Actors who transform themselves for a role are a special kind of madmen. They don't just act, they literally disappear. Some lose 30 kilograms and eat only 1 leaf of lettuce a day, some spend half their lives in the makeup chair, and some go crazy in search of the truth in their character. All for 2 hours of film and a few minutes of applause. But this is precisely what gives rise to those roles that make it seem that cinema is not just an art, but a form of self-sacrifice. Natalie Portman becomes a living metaphor for pain and perfectionism. Eddie Murphy becomes a whole family. And Christian Bale always looks like everything has been stolen from him, except his ambition. Each of them pays in their own way, with their nerves, their bodies, their time, sometimes even their careers. And all this so that the viewer will say, "Wow, what a performance." The more you watch stories like this, the clearer it becomes. Real acting is not just about talent, it's about suffering, discipline, and a touch of madness, sometimes literally. Because who in their right mind would agree to wear 10 kilograms of latex or eat carrots with air for the sake of frame purity? Only an actor who has no other choice. And we, the audience, can afford the luxury of just sitting, watching, and admiring. So if you like watching actors literally transform themselves for a role, welcome. Here we analyze those who go beyond common sense and make cinema alive, strange, and real. Support the video with a like or comment. It helps the channel not to drown in algorithms. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories about those who live a whole life for 2 hours on screen, as well as other interesting cases. And, as any director would say before a take, camera, action. And you, in the meantime, press subscribe.